Good evening and welcome to this public workshop of the Board of Education. I am Board President Robert Silkworth. Tonight the board will learn more from Dr. Mark Bedell and his staff about staffing allocations for the 2024-25 school year. This workshop will cover shifts in school classroom staffing for the coming year. This workshop is open to the public. However, no public comment will be taken. This workshop is being broadcast live on our YouTube channel at www.aacps.org/YouTube. Thank you so much for joining us this evening. Welcome, everyone. Dr. Bedell.
Thank you, Mr. President. I want to start off by thanking our staff who's here today to present. We will have our Chief Operating Officer, Matt Stansky, who will take us through this. Chief Finance Officer, Matt Stansky, will take us through this presentation. But I want to start off by just kind of giving a quick overview. And then I also want to address just a couple of things that have come across my emails. First and foremost, the reason why we wanted to do this staffing allocation workshop is because we noticed that it has brought up some significant concern in some of our communities when the staffing projections came out at several of our schools. I think what people probably don't understand is that there are multiple indicators that played a role in where we are as a school district from a staffing standpoint, some of which you will hear today in more detail. One, projection adjustments, because the school district did not hit the projected enrollment a year ago. Redistricting that occurred in parts of our county where that also required us to make some adjustments to staffing. We also know that we have a state law in Maryland Blueprint for the Future that also plays a role in how money will now follow a student. And that is one of the factors. But then two other factors that I think people may not be as aware of. Last year, when I conducted the 17 listening and learning tours, there were two major themes that emerged. One was that special education in our county is not performing at the level that our students deserve. And so we knew that we needed to do something about special education. We needed to take a look at some of our allocations and to do what we needed to do to try to provide a stronger special education program in this school district. We are in the midst of doing that. But the other one that I heard, which is also dealing with exceptional education, is gifted and talented education. We received a number of concerns that the school district wasn't doing a good enough job in really educating students that are gifted and talented. And these are some of the areas that we as a cabinet said that we have to focus on in order to ultimately respond to what the community was bringing up. I am a data-driven superintendent, and I've said that from day one. And so I asked the staff to share with me in terms of from a historical standpoint, how many of our classes across this county actually will have 30 or more students in them? And generally, we run from 1 to 1.5% based on the data, where depending on enrollment, individual student school enrollment, who shows up, that is something that has occurred. I've been in education since 1999. I'm not certain that I've ever worked in a school district where that did not happen, where you may have a class or two that may have students with 30 or 31 students in the classroom. The goal should be to not allow that to happen. And I think as a school district, that is something that we have focused on in this school district over the years, trying to prevent it. But you don't know what you have until actual students show up. And as a school district, we then have to continue to monitor. You're going to hear a little bit about that. But I also want to bring this piece up because in the frustration of some of our concerned parents And I think every parent has a right to really express their frustration. Again, I will go back to my very first board meeting. I think it's a way that we go about addressing our concerns. And when you get some of the tone and some of the accusatory things that are being approached at this administration, I can't sit back and just allow for that to go silently. So I'm going to talk about one thing that really concerns me, that this administration doesn't care about academics, that this administration doesn't care about all kids. We care about every single kid. In fact, we've inserted more transparency around our data than, at least from what I've been able to track. We also said in our strategic plan that we would create a scorecard. Last I checked, I don't think Anne Arundel County has ever had a scorecard that focus on data outcomes that will truly allow for all of our kids to show, that for us to show the community that when we say all means all means all. We have expectations that we're going to grow every single one of our students. And I've said that from day one. I've also been very vocal about the fact that we have schools in this county that are rated 8 and 9 on great school reports, don't have a single national merit scholar. Does that sound like somebody who's not academic oriented? The fact that I'm trying to reallocate staff to make sure that we do a better job of serving special education kids, but also serving the gifted and talented kids in this school district. The fact that we put a new math curriculum in that we think will better prepare our kids. The fact that we're moving to the science of reading so that we can make sure that our kids are more literate. The fact that we put in pre-SAT starting with our 10th graders so that we can identify AP potential so more students can become national merit scholars down the line. And the fact that we're continuously having conversations around how do we enhance the middle school experience? How do we add more rigor in the middle school so that those kids are better prepared as they move into the high school ranks? I think I've demonstrated that I am an academically oriented superintendent. From the deep data dives that we do with our staff to the deep data dives that we do with this school board. And we've done 2 of them, thorough deep data dives that are archived. So anybody who thinks that this administration is here trying to dumb down the school district, that we don't care about certain kids, we care about all kids. And I've said that the first 2 years that I've been here, that's going to be my commitment. That will play out in the work that we do in our strategic plan. But here's the reality of it. There are some tough decisions that we have to make that in some cases are beyond our control. And then there are some tough decisions that we have to make to ensure that every single kid gets the services that they deserve in this county. Mr. Stansky is going to start off with a video clip. Again, reminding people that we have been doing these presentations around Blueprint since I've arrived. And these presentations are archived. Nothing should come as a surprise around what's happening. And we think that there was some really good questioning that came from Ms. Frank at one of the board members that we want to remind people of, that questioning was pinpoint around the realities of what the staffing applications were going to look like as a result of us having to adhere to this law, in addition to some of these other things that I've also mentioned. So we want to start off with the clip, and then Mr. Stansky will take us through this presentation to ensure that there is some understanding. And then when we get to the end, we will close it out with really updating people on how we plan to monitor enrollment over the summer to give people assurance that we're going to take a look at all of our classes. And our goal is to try to not have any of our classes have over 30 students enrolled. But we have a system and we have a process that we're going to stick to. Mr. Stansky, I'll pass it over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Bedell, President Silkworth, members of the board. For the record, Matt Stansky, Chief Financial Officer. As Dr. Bedell alluded to, instead of regurgitating some of the things we've talked about, we decided to replay a short clip of a presentation and back and forth we had back in November. Done are we with the days of one big pot of money, of county money, and now it is counties have to match each one of these 9 programs. And now School districts will now have to distribute each one of these 9 programs based on the rules outlined either in law or regulation to the schools in which these students who generate the dollars attend. And we'll have reporting requirements for each one of these 9 programs, and schools and district leaders will have to manage to ensure that we are meeting the requirements of all 9. So it's not just one number per school, it will be 9 numbers per school. What kind of variance can we see in the typical student? So you see in the chart in front of you, we have a profile of 3 different students, and you can see the vast funding levels that the blueprint requires for each 3. The first student is every student gets the K through 12 gets that foundation amount, and this is for fiscal 24, or the year we're in. So you get $8,642. Again, that's split between state and county, right? So that's not, the state's not giving us $8,642. They're only giving us about 35% of that number. Student B is one who has qualified for free and reduced price meals, so we're adding another $75.19 to that. So student B generates $16,161. And then you can see over at student C qualifies for all 3 sub-programs and gets the foundation amount. So student through C actually generates $32,754. These are all at the 100% level. So again, a reminder that the requirement is that we show 75% of this money being allocated and spent at the schools that these students receive. But again, you see even at the 100% level, we're almost, a $24,000 difference between student C and student A. And that's intentional, right? That's the state indicating that because of the challenges that student C faces in learning, that the resources required to educate student C are greater than they are for student A. So what does this mean for schools? So we have, these are 2 sample schools, but this, I think, gives a great indication of what the intent, again, of the blueprint. And just level set everyone, these are, again, at the 100% level. So, obviously the rule is 75%. But you see you have 2 smaller elementary schools here, school A, school B. One has 443 students, one has 433 students. So school B has 10 fewer students than school A. But yet, because of the demographic makeup of school A as compared to school B, you see school A has a farms rate in the middle, you would say, of the range. Their ELL population is low. They generate $4.9 million, all those students together, for school A. Whereas school B, with 10 fewer students, because they have more students qualify for farms, more students who qualify for EL, you can see the budget for school B almost doubles to $9.8 million. This is a big change, right? Now, I will say Anne Arundel County Public Schools has done a great job of differentiating staffing over the years, and this goes back to the business rules. We all have to have an understanding where our baseline is to then see what changes have to be made to ensure that both school B is getting what they need and school A are getting what they need, right? Because both students in those buildings deserve what they need, but this goes to the core of equity, right? This goes to the core of equity, meaning those who need it should have it. And this is ultimately what the blueprint is mandating, and what we're going to have to work to ensure that we're complying with.
When we move to allocate resources to meet these new formulas, will we be removing funding from schools to be compliant?
Potentially. I can't speak to that for sure, but I don't want to take that off the table either.
So do we currently have schools that are overfunded?
Do we currently have schools that are overfunded? No.
So to be removing funding is not something that we would look to do unless legally mandated.
Correct. Okay. So that was just again, the level set, get a little background of the discussions we've had as an administration and with the board on money following the student over the past 6 months, really the past year. as we began to implement this. And so ultimately, as we kind of dive into how we resource schools, what's really the overarching goal, right? And you see the overarching goal here is to really use our FTEs that we have budgeted. I think that's a key word that I'm going to come back to a lot. Budgeted FTEs as effectively as possible, really ultimately now to ensure the implementation of our strategic plan, which was just adopted by this board at the last meeting, and while also complying legally with legal mandates that include mandates from the Blueprint for Maryland's Future. So I'm going to talk about budget again, and because immediately folks will say, hey, like, start outside the classroom first before going into the classroom to make reductions. And I think this chart, while folks at times can get confused by it, but I think it's important to see, which is that Anne Arundel County has the second highest student to non-instructional staff ratio in the state. So what that means is, on the teaching side, you want that ratio as low as possible, right? You want more teachers, fewer students than interacted. Where you have non-instructional staff, you want that as high as possible, right? So think of like your central office. So think of all the non-instructional staff we have per student, and we actually have the second highest ratio in the state, which means we're very efficient with our dollars, and we focus our dollars where they need to be focused, which is in the classroom. I also think it's important for us to reflect on where we've been funding-wise over the last 15 years. And so what you see here is our county-leveled per pupil expenditure percentage increases from 2010 through 2025. And I think this is important because as we seen significant increases, and I can use that word significant because I believe that is intentional and true. You see 8%, 6.3%, 5.6% increases. Those are good increases, but we are making up for lost time. You can see even in 2012, at the height of the recession, the Anne Arundel County government applied for a maintenance of effort waiver and was awarded a waiver. And that actually then reduced the budget, the per pupil budget, by 2.1%. And so then you jump back up, we saw 0, 0, 0, and then slight increases up until 2018, a good increase in 2020, back down during the pandemic years of 21 and 22. But I think it's critical for us to have this context for a couple of reasons. One, there was a lot of things in the district that went unfunded or uninvested in, right? Obviously, this board is well aware of the compensation challenges that we had to overcome starting in 2019 to make up for all of that lost funding in that decade. And so we've had to be intentional to invest in makeup steps, invest in higher COLAs to get our starting teacher salaries up higher. But those investments come out as a trade-off to something else, right? And that trade-off at times is, for the last 3 to 4 years, has been new teacher FTEs. One, because we've had to invest in keeping the workforce we have, but it's hard to ask for new FTEs when you can't fill the ones that you have, right? And so we made those intentional investments in order to attract and retain our employees. So let's talk about timeline a little bit. So the law in 5-234 mandated that on July 1st of 2023, that the state of Maryland have a new reporting system and guidance documents updated for districts to follow to begin implementation of the provisions in that law, which inerts began July 1st of 2024, so in a few months. That system nor that guidance was available. And if you remember, on November 1st, in briefing the board, we had a long discussion about the lack of that guidance inhibiting our ability to move forward in trying to begin implementation of these provisions. To the point where we had to start thinking about our, quote, good faith effort to begin to comply with these requirements. And so on March 8th, we do what we typically do is we had to release staffing based on what we knew at that time. And what we knew at that time is we had to make a good faith effort to begin to comply with the blueprint. And we'll talk through what that staffing allocation looks like. After that release of staffing, then came the official adoption of initial guidance of good faith effort. Then on April 5th of 2024, MSDE and AIB actually did release their local fiscal reporting guidance. We are now taking that, and we will be working on that this summer to begin to adjust our account structures to meet the requirements outlined in the law. And then just last week, the AIB adopted further guidance now around implementation of these provisions. And that guidance includes the following. So they are now calling fiscal 25 a baseline year, the benchmark year. And so essentially what we're having to do now that we have the guidance, is my team is working to review every single expenditure account we have in the district. And we will now have to take that guidance and use it to tie it to a blueprint program. We are fortunate here in Anne Arundel County, we have significant revenue that is not tied to the blueprint. So if there is something that's not a good fit, we can tie it to that revenue. I've tried to think of ways to explain this to your average citizen, and I think I tried this one out last week, so I'm gonna try it on with you guys. So the provisions are essentially taking, if you're a married couple and you have a joint checking account, you both work, your paychecks go into the joint checking account, and then the checking account pays your bills, pays the mortgage, pays the car payment, pays the grocery bill. What the blueprint is now forcing us to do is to stay married, but we're going to have separate checking accounts. And my check's going to go into this account, my spouse's check is going to go into that account. And then we have to now determine who's paying the mortgage, who's paying the car payment, who's paying the grocery bill. And we're going to have to do this for every school for all 9 of those programs, like I've outlined. And so the work now is for my team, really between when this guidance came out, and I'm giving them really till October, to go through every single account, look at the guidance document, and tag it to a blueprint program. This will give us our baseline, and then this will allow us to say, okay, here is where we are compliant, and here's where we're not. That's where we lead to then FY26, which the mandate is we need to reduce the gap of non-compliant schools by 50%, and then ultimately in fiscal 27, reduce that non-compliance gap all the way so that 100% of our schools are compliant. There are waiver provisions for extenuating circumstances. We are unclear yet of what that process will look like. But think of things like opening Severn Run High School. Old Mill High School would immediately be out of compliance because the blueprint would expect them to be funded at their prior year enrollment. We would never fund them on their prior year enrollment because they're losing 300 to 400 kids to Severn Run. So we would apply for a waiver for Old Mill to say, we will not meet this requirement at Old Mill High School because the enrollment fluctuation was too great for us to meet that requirement. So this is the work that we're going to be doing now. It is all tied into what we're doing here. So let's do a little more deep dive into how staffing works in Anne Arundel County Public Schools. So the planning office, led by Dr. Heiser and Mr. Roof, every year go through and do a projected enrollment. That enrollment is released to schools. Schools have an opportunity to push back, provide evidence to say that the enrollment projection is off. You can imagine most schools don't say my projection's too high. They usually say, my projection's too low because they want to keep many staff as possible. And so there's a back and forth. And there is sometimes information that building leaders have that the planning office may not necessarily be aware of, but that process goes over a 2 to 3 week period. But ultimately those projections are locked down in January. And then we go into the team of one over here to my left. then takes those projections and begins to apply our staffing ratios to those projections. We, again, look at enrollment changes. We look at ratio changes from grade to grade. There's obviously programmatic changes that we review as well. And then in March, we allocate the positions that allows the principals and team to participate in the voluntary transfer process, the hiring process, be notified of assignment changes prior to the end of the school year, and it obviously maximizes our recruiting opportunities. So the earlier we can get staffing out, that bigger the head start those schools have in recruitment. Since I've been in this industry, it seems the recruiting of new teachers happens earlier and earlier and earlier. And so the earlier we can get staffing out to schools, the leg up they have in the now, ever competitive market of teachers as we have fewer and fewer graduates. It's critical that we get these out. So again, and I can't stress enough that this is all based on projected enrollment, right? Projected enrollment, and that's important as we move forward. And then other positions that sometimes are driven off that initial allocation are also allocated later in the spring. Our elementary cultural arts, our special education staff, our student service staff. This would be like your counselors, your psychologists, your social workers, and then any grant-funded positions, Title I, community schools, things of that nature are also then distributed to schools in the spring. Like I said, so then the springtime, our positions are distributed. We do hold back positions to respond to enrollment fluctuations. So this is where we get from projected to actualization, right? So in the middle of July, at some point, the IDD staff produces or goes through a process called rollover, where we roll over our student information system and start the new school year essentially. And it happens in July, and that's when we get our first look at actual enrollments. And then that's when during that time, usually on a weekly basis, we began to look and see where there's fluctuations, to see where there are differences from projected. And we began to start allocating any FTEs that we may have in reserve to alleviate any class sizes that we deemed that were elevated or higher than what we would like to see. So we've talked a lot about the blueprint and its impact on staffing. I think I'd like to say for the record that the blueprint is not the sole reason for staffing changes, but I also want to say it is part of a reason, right? And so I think, but what we have here are some of the other factors, the other variables that are impacting staffing, and Dr. Bedell alluded to them. The ones in bold are kind of unique for fiscal 25. The ones not, that are the ones that we have every year, right? Changes in enrollment projections, that's an annual thing that happens. Academic, social, and emotional student needs, we do take that into consideration as we're allocating staff. Requirements outlined for the blueprint, that's a new one. This is our first year for that, and so that was a factor. Student mobility has always been a factor, but as Dr. Bedell alluded to, redistricting, right, is a huge factor. And so it's really important that we keep that cadre of FTEs, because we need to make sure what we projected for redistricting actually comes to fruition. And if it doesn't, if there's a school that we missed, we have the ability to address that school. Well aware of the cuts to funding to ESSER, right? The ESSER grant is going away, so those FTEs are going away. Our Title I program is being impacted, albeit lower than what we thought initially, so which is good, but there is still some impact there. And then, right, we have programmatic changes, and Dr. Bedell alluded to these, right? We have pre-K expansion. The county did not fund our pre-K request, so we've reallocated FTEs to open 3 new pre-K classrooms for next year. Special education, Dr. Bedell alluded to again, the need to enhance that program. So we've used FTEs to help support that. We've created 6 new assistant principal positions. We have tried for a long time to get funded for assistant principals. It's not happening. So Dr. Bedell made the bold decision to go ahead and reallocate some FTEs to create 6 new AP positions to help those schools that don't have an AP get an AP. we are creating 12 lead teachers. We'll be one of the first districts in the state to have level 4 lead teachers here as part of the blueprint mandate. So there'll be 12 of those that will be starting next school year. Dr. Bedell alluded to our commitment to gifted and talented students and increasing services for them as well. And then we have, again, we're opening 2 new schools this year, which is requiring significant resources to staff up and open up on time. All right, we want to talk a little bit about the nuances of elementary staffing and secondary staffing. And so that a lot of things on its face, seem like they'd be the same, but they're actually not. So school A, let's talk about this scenario. Has the largest class size in this school is in grade 3. And let's say that class size for the ratio in grade 3 requires 4 teachers. But then that ratio jumps up in 4th grade, meaning that now that cohort of students fits within 3 teachers, given the ratio. And so even though there was no enrollment change in that school, they actually lost a teacher because of that situation. Juxtapose that with school B. School B was staffed at the same level, but then had an influx of students throughout the year. But then the enrollment projection took into account that influx of students for the following year. So there's really no change in the enrollment, but we have to add a teacher there because of that influx in staff. And so while you have 2 schools with no change in projected enrollment, we actually have a school that would lose a teacher and a school that would gain a teacher. Let's talk about secondary. So we have in the current school year, school A was projected at 1,100 students, but that current enrollment came in only at 1,000 students. So for the next school year, we're projecting them at 1,050, but they lost. So because of that, they're actually losing 2.5 positions. And they're losing 2.5 positions because they were staffed at 1,100 during the school year, but only saw 1,000 come in, and then the projection. So then projection reflected them gaining 50, but it was still lower than what they were staffed at the prior year. So they lose 2.5 students. So then you have school B, who is projected at 1,000 students, has currently enrolled 1,000 students. So they're also being projected at 1,050, but they're actually going to gain 2.5 because that projection is higher than what they were staffed at in the prior year. So it's always key to remember that initial staffing is always projected to projected. And because of that, you have 2 schools with the same enrollment. One's losing 2.5, one's gaining 2.5. So what's our checks and balances around this? We have really 4 main entities that kind of review this, both yearly allocations, summer requests, and then enrollment-based changes. We have the Office of School Performance, who are the content area experts, the Chief Academic Officer, the School Resource Allocations Office, and the Superintendent. And then the Human Resources Office, the Budget Office, and the School Resources Allocation Office works together to manage the position control process to ensure that we're never over allocated or never over our allotment of FTEs. But it's a large group of folks that are constantly monitoring and reviewing and ensuring that 1, we're staying within budget, but 2, that we're most effective in our use of FTEs available to us. And just a quick reminder that of the blueprint funding categories. I can now put on here some of the items that are allowed to be funded with these categories, given the version 1 of the guidance that was released in April. So again, basic foundation is your basic operating expenses. So your classroom teachers, administrators, secretaries, your student service positions, technology, other building related costs such as utilities, maintenance, things like that can be used for foundation. Compensatory education, again, this is students who qualify for free and reduced price meals. You can use this money for additional classroom teachers, additional student services, interventions, any costs related to extended day, extended year. Multilingual learner, this is the new term now we had English language development. The state is now referring to them as multilingual learners. This is, again, you can use these for additional classroom teachers, English language development teachers, bilingual positions, translation expenses, things like that. Special education, again, you can use that funding for anything related to a IEP or individual education learning plan. And pre-kindergarten, obviously the pre-kindergarten funding will cover any costs associated with running a pre-K classroom. So those are the dollar amounts now for fiscal 25. So as I explained to you earlier in my probably not so sophisticated way, but the current process is we get all our basic funding, you get our per pupil, and then we allocate staffing accordingly. Now the process in the blueprint is very different. All the funding sources are broken out separately, and we will have to assign resources. That means staff and non-personnel costs to each blueprint program, and justify it based on what we discussed earlier around what is allowable for each program. Okay, so we spent a long time on this. We had many discussions when we knew that we had to show initially a good faith effort, but also knowing that even if we now have this sort of 3-year runway, we had to make some progress in year 1, or we were going to be in serious trouble getting to compliance by year 2 and 3. And Dr. Bedell, came to me and said, we need a tiered staffing model, period. Blueprint, no blueprint, I want a tiered staffing model, right? And so this is what we initially arrived at, right? So what you see in green is what we had traditionally done in the past for all schools. So all schools were originally, this staffing ratio was used as a starting point. But here's what I'll say. We've never had the FTE allotment to fund that staffing ratio. So while we published that staffing ratio, it wasn't necessarily really our true ratio because we never had the FTEs to fund it, number one. I think it is critically important to say this. These are targets. They're not maximums. They're not minimums. They are targets. And so sometimes we'll have schools below these numbers. Sometimes, unfortunately, we have schools above these numbers. But I think it's critical to know. So even when we had the old ratio, so if you're looking at Tier 3, Grade 5 at 28, which is what used to be the ratio for all schools, we had schools exceeding 28. We have them this year. We had them last year. We had them the year before. We just never had the FTEs. And so I think there's a conception that the minute a class hits 29 in the old ratio, we would immediately authorize another FTE. And that's just not what happens. Sometimes we let them go 2 over. Sometimes we'd even let them go 3 over. Again, it would depend on the school and whether there even was money available or FTE available to do that. So that's the old ratio, but we keep that sort of similar concept with the new ratio. So Tier 1 is the base ratio that we start with all schools, but ultimately stick with, we're looking at farms, right? And so we broke our schools into farms based on their farms percentage. And so the base number 1 is schools with 0 to 14.9% farms. You see the ratio there, and you see the ratio for middle and high school. So it's important on the secondary side, just so we're clear. Those are not class sizes. Those are ratios to just generate the staff that schools then go and schedule with. Right. Tier 2 is 15% to 29.9. So any additional staffing that a Tier 2 through Tier 5 will get would either go then into compensatory education or English language or multilingual learner. So this was our attempt to now then start to shift staff from foundation over to those 2 blueprint programs to begin our journey to compliance with those provisions. But as you can see, then you get up, I'm just going to skip over to Tier 5. You can see in Tier 5, the ratios, obviously the target ratios are a lot smaller than they are in Tier 1. And so what did that allow us to do? That did allow us to take we have roughly 3,600 FTEs in total. That allowed us to move about over 600 FTEs into the compensatory education bucket as well as the multilingual learner bucket. Those are big dollar amounts that we're going to have to comply with. And so this will not get us to where we need to go. But again, I think it shows our good faith effort in transferring some of our teaching FTEs over into those two areas to allow us to begin that journey to compliance. So what ultimately as a system did these ratios produce? Dr. Bedell alluded to, right? We have right now only 1.5% of our elementary classes at 30 to 32 per class. It's a total of 25 classes in 8 schools. None of the schools are of a higher farms rate than 16%. I think Dr. Bedell made clear we don't want any schools at 30 to 32. But this is what we initially have. Again, this is projected, and we will obviously monitor through the summer to see what we can do to reduce that number and hopefully make it less than that. But good news, we have more than 86% of our classes at or under tiered ratios. So that means, less than 14, they're slightly over 1 to 2. And we only have 16% of our classes over the prior ratio. So over the ones in the green, we only have 16% of our classes over our original ratios. And then finally, and I think most exciting, is our highest need schools. We have 0 classes over 24 students. 73% of those classes actually are under 20 students in their class. So let's talk about a little more history, though, with class sizes of 30 or more. So for fiscal 18 to 24, when we released staffing, there was 57 total classes over that 6-year period that had a projection of 30 or more in grade 4. But then when the school year started, we were able to at least reduce those to 41. Same with grade 5, 58, but we were actually able to reduce those by the time school started to 38. So this is, again, to kind of give the board a reassurance that we will do what we can to reduce those class sizes if the FTEs are available and if we're confident that the students are there, that there is a process in place to allocate additional FTEs. And this is proof of that process, that we have not, in prior years had projected a certain number and actuals at a certain number. And so then obviously for fiscal 25, where we're at the moment for grade 4s, we have 12 projected TBD on actuals and 22 at 30 or more and TBD on actuals as well. And so finally, I want to end with, we received word last Thursday that the New Village Academy board has voted to delay their opening for a year. Obviously sad news for us in that school, but seemed, given their circumstances, the right thing to do. But what that does is, as this board is aware, we have just over $3 million allocated to open that school, which then, lends us an opportunity to potentially work with our partners at the county council to reallocate that funding within our budget to possibly get us some additional FTEs to reduce those class sizes that we just talked about. And I think I'm confident to say that Dr. Bedell, that would be one of his top priorities, is to use that funding to get additional FTEs to address specifically elementary schools with class sizes of 30 or higher. Again, I think we would still follow a process where we roll over, we see what actual enrollments look like in the summer, and we begin to address those systematically if we have FTEs available to do so. And we believe it would be a good use of some of that money to get us some FTEs to help address some of the class sizes that that I've talked about here this evening. And so with that, I thank you for taking the time to listen, and happy to answer any questions you may have.
Thank you, Mr. Stansky. So we're going to go in roll call order. And this evening, first we have Ms. Shelheim.
Thank you, as always, for your thorough presentation. I am grateful. I do have a number of questions. I tried to send a few of those in advance. And then I definitely have one or two that were prompted by tonight's presentation. So I'll just go ahead and launch in. And this is one that was prompted by the presentation. So if you said there were 25 classes in 8 schools that are over that are at the 30 to 32 projection for elementary school for student teacher ratio. How many of those, and I'm trying to look as I'm doing this, it seems like many of those are District 5, Broadneck, Severna Park. Is that an accurate?
Broadneck, Severna Park, Crofton, and South River.
Okay. And I'm glad that we're going to use hopefully, pending the county council's approval, use that money to help provide some relief at those schools. Because I think for better or worse, I think optically what people are thinking is like, at least in my district, blueprint equals higher class sizes equals blueprint's bad, which is not the goal of blueprint. But given the fact that we were never fully funded to begin with, blueprint is exacerbating. Is that a fair assessment?
I would say, again, I think what I try to reiterate in the presentation is there's a number of factors that influence staffing. I don't know that I touched on this enough, which is, and Dr. Bedell did at the beginning, which is our projected enrollment last year was inflated a little, 1,800 students, right? We were projecting an 1,800 student increase and we ended up flat, right?
Yeah.
And so our projections for this upcoming year had to reflect that. So right away, a reduction in the projection is gonna take staffing out. I think it's not fair to so because of that, it's not fair to solely blame the blueprint for everything that's going on. But I understand, changes in the formula, and that the blueprint did intend for a reimagining and rethinking of how districts allocate resources.
And fair, and a lot of schools and students and families throughout the county, up and down it, haven't had what some schools in Severna Park have and in Broadneck have enjoyed for quite some time. My thinking is that blueprint would raise all boats without removal of some to
Right.
others, and instead lift all boat. But you can only do that if you were fully funded to begin with.
Correct.
And we've never been fully, as you were saying, like we've never
That's-
been able to meet the green.
Yeah, that's why I wanted to show that chart to show, that we were
That's
catching up. And,
useful.
I bring the chart every year of, we're 13th in the state in per pupil revenue, right? And so we don't have Howard County money. We don't have Baltimore County money. We don't have Baltimore City money. We don't have Prince George's County money. And so, these are our competitors.
And y'all, we don't have that money, just for folks that might be listening on YouTube, is because we've decided to kneecap ourselves from a tax revenue perspective.
And
just saying.
I do, but I think the blueprint, and I'll even share in some of this, I don't want to say blame, but the blueprint is very difficult to communicate because it is so massive. So many things are happening. But I feel compelled to say it was never meant to be completely additive, right? I think there was a a belief that it was just going to bring more money, period. And to your point, like everybody's going to like resonate. I'm not discounting the investment the state has made. Like there's been significant, right?
Absolutely.
And we know that because of that investment, it's created fiscal challenges at the state. But there was a not so spoken about component, which was the expectations that districts reimagine and reallocate. And I'm not even saying that's what's happening here, but I want to put that on the record that more of that is coming. And Dr. Bedell's been on the forefront of it. We look today, right? Because of what you described accurately as our funding challenges, we don't have an AP in every elementary school. An AP is desperately needed. These are folks that help make instruction better. And we don't have them everywhere. And so we've had to make tough decisions to take existing positions and create assistant principals. Special education, right? Same thing. We've had special education requests for FTEs for 2 years now that have gone unfunded. We've had to make tough decisions to reallocate positions to do that. But that does come at the expense of something. And so, Ms. Schallheim, it's a long-winded way of me saying there's a number of factors going into what's happening right now. And it's hard to pull out one or the other as the sole blame. But it's all integrated, and it's all a compilation of things that are leading to, in some instances, a small percentage, but in some instances, elevated class sizes. But Dr. Bedell, go ahead.
And let me just add to that, because you made a comment around how massive Blueprint is. And adding assistant principals was just not some random thing that we were looking to do, right? We also know that there's a requirement on part of the law that requires that these administrators are spending 20% of their time in the classroom, which also means that we still have to run schools. We still have to hold our IEP meetings and all of those things that require a certified administrator to be available to adhere to the special education laws. So I know some people will say, well, assistant principals aren't important. Why are you just doing that? Like, why can't those be converted to FTEs for classrooms? Again, because of the massiveness of this law, and we are a school district that's fully committed to adhering to doing Blueprint the way that it was intended to do, to the spirit of it, right? Those are also decisions that are being made to make sure that we're able to fully comply with the law. So I just want to make sure I'm clearing that assistant principal piece up, because without that explanation, people will just think, well, you could easily just convert those, and we can't.
Yep, no, I
And
appreciate that.
I'll say for the record that was my initial thought when we first started having these conversations. That was my thinking, like, okay, well, instead of this, why don't we do that at this school? And so your clarification around that is very important, as it helps all of us, including myself, learn how to wrap our heads around this. I will reiterate, though, just for the record, that had we been fully funded from jump, this would have been easier. This wouldn't have been as hard as a lift had we been fully funded. Now, I don't lay that blame at anyone specifically, but we've only seen these really great budgets for a few years. And prior to that, we had not in the school system for quite some time, as I understand it. I'm sure I will get corrected if I'm wrong. Seeing your head move as no, I would assume that I am correct in that. Thank you. A couple more quick things, and then I'll yield. With regard to the cultural arts staff, how were those decisions made, and do we know where? I can guess one place, but can you help a girl
Yeah,
out?
so cultural arts for elementary are allocated based on the number of teaching positions you have in the school, right? So if you're losing teaching positions, there's a potential you could lose a cultural, and not even a whole cultural arts teacher. It may be, depending on the size of the school, you have full-time PE, music, triple E, art, media, but sometimes you share them, right? And so it may just be that because you lost a teacher, you lose, gonna get in the weeds here, but a 0.2. So
Got
meaning
it.
your music teacher who was 5 days a week at your school is now only going to be there 4 days a week. And then that music teacher will pick up a section at another school. It become itinerant essentially.
Got it. If I can get the understanding of what was lost and or gained specifically at Severna Park Elementary, I would appreciate that.
We have already submitted to the board staffing for every school. I'll be happy to do the cultural arts the same.
Yeah, that would be lovely.
We'll just send them for
I appreciate
for
that.
every
I think
school
we
and
all
every
would like to
district.
see where things fall.
Yep.
Okay. A lot of the questions I asked in advance have been answered, like regarding the timeline, that's been answered. Folks, you're just going to have to be patient out there. I get that being patient is really hard. I'm an Aries, okay? Like I'm a fiery Aries 100. I have no patience about anything. We're going to have to be patient about this because this is just the way the world works. This is the way school systems function. I'm just speaking to constituents directly now. Like it's all seasonal. It comes out, as you said, as Mr. Sansky said, in January and February. It's sent to schools in March. And then you just run numbers every week until you have what they consider to be as close to an actual as possible, and final decisions are made in July and August. They're not going to be made sooner than that. So I just please implore everyone listening to this, and I hope that that's going to be a lot of folks, to just please be patient. So thank you that was a large part about where I was going with that. And then I'm going to try to be careful how I ask this for obvious reasons, but in situations where it's just been a really tough school year for whatever that reason is, I think we can infer. Are there any special considerations being given to that fact, to those specific social and or emotional needs of any students or groups of students? Did I say that carefully
I think I
enough?
would say every school is unique, and it's not just Matt and his team looking at a spreadsheet and looking at numbers and, moving it around. So there is a human side to this, and that human factor is considered again when we review in the summertime.
Okay, and then lastly, real super quick, if we're able to get those extra staff, and I know that you want a tiered system and it's great. If we're able to get those extra staff and allocate them appropriately so that really no school, except for a very extenuating circumstance, has over 30 kids, could we see an adjustment to this tiered model with
Yeah,
the numbers on it?
we won't be adjusting it. I mean, because here's the reality of it. We established this as a model to ensure, and if you look at the slide where you could already see based on this model that improvements have already been made from previous years. When you look at the number of sections of classes, the prior year, prior to this model, you had far more classes that had 30 or more students. So I think I feel like we have a good model here that's going to also, remember, we still have to move to getting to 100%. And Mr. Stansky already said, like, we're just getting started with this, but I think in order to be able to adhere to the true spirit of this and trying to get to that, no, 75%, not 100%, 75%, right?
Yep.
So I think tampering with this, then we're going to come back and end up having to do it again. And I don't think that's something, I don't want to mislead people.
Okay. But just to reiterate, though, so that this doesn't inadvertently mislead anyone, is that the intention is no class sizes over 30.
That's the goal.
Okay, so when we do extra communications around this, it would be great if we can also state that so people don't get it confused.
Sure.
Thank you so
Yep,
much.
yep.
Thank you.
Thank you, Ms. Shahai. Ms. Frank?
Yes, thank you. I had a hard stop at 7 and I have to run and catch a plane, so I'm going to make this very, very brief. The 16% that you mentioned of the schools that lost staff and now are over the previously recommended amount, do you have a number for that 16%? How many schools is that, or how many classes is that?
I can get it for you. I don't.
All right, and then I had also requested to see where the teachers were being moved to and from. I had hoped to kind of see like a maybe a map of, just to kind of see where the movement was, to be able to visualize it. I know we've gotten lists, but if you have anything like that, I would definitely be interested to see. I know you kind of verbally mentioned it as well, but I would like to see the to and the from so that we can see where the concentrations lie on both ends. And then just briefly, I thank you for the clip. That was lovely. It's one of my favorite, actually. And you missed the best part.
No, that was intentional too.
Yeah. The concern of equity, because it was brought up again, and what we're seeing play out, and I'll make this brief, is the criticism of it is how equity frequently implemented takes money from some students to redistribute wealth to other students. And in this case, we are defunding public education to some students to allow greater resources for others, which was never touted by the folks who sold the blueprint. And of course, parents are angry about that. That was never explained to them when this bill was passing and when this was being implemented. So I sympathize, Dr. Bedell, that you weren't even here when this passed. But obviously, people are going to be angry at this. And, there's nothing that you can do, Dr. Bedell, but this certainly was not what was relayed to folks before this passed. So with that, I have to catch a plane. Thank you.
Have a safe trip.
Thank you.
Dr. Tobin?
Thank you. So to pick up on that note, Ms. Frank's question on the video about whether any schools were overfunded. This is just comment on my part and an observation, because I think this may be a distinction that's important, and I think has been there in all of your comments tonight, Mr. Stansky, and yours, Dr. Bedell, but just to say it maybe another way. I think it's fair to say we had no schools that were overfunded, but we did have many schools that were less underfunded than others, if that makes sense. And I do think, now I happen to have delved very deeply into the blueprint before I came on this board through other work of my own. And so this was very clear in the blueprint to anybody who was paying attention, that this was in fact what was going to happen, because just as Ms. Schalheim has mentioned, at the end of the day, it was my understanding that one of the reasons the blueprint was structured the way it was structured was to prevent resources going where, and I'll just say this bluntly, where the greatest noise was, perhaps, or the greatest advocacy, and to ensure that at the very least, what funding you have goes to those with the highest need. To Ms. Schalheim's point, it simply reveals the gaps that were always there in funding, but weren't felt in all parts of the county in our case. And so I just think it's important to say that publicly and to reiterate, I think, what Ms. Schalheim was saying, which is, and maybe to respectfully disagree with something Ms. Frank said, which is there is a way to fix this. Advocate for appropriate funding for your school system. That will fix it. What Blueprint is doing, while infusing a lot of money from the state, is saying, but based on the data, based on the extensive research that Blueprint is based on, we know we need to ensure students in these various categories get what they need. And so I think, I hope one of the things the public takes from this, especially those who are concerned about staffing allocations, is that they need now to be advocating for the funding of the entire system, right? This is not going to work when you simply advocate for just a very particular part of the system, and that is the point. And I think more broadly, I believe as a board member, I believe Dr. Bedell believes this, and I think many of my colleagues do as well. When the whole system does better, every student does better at the end of the day. And so I just want to get that out there on the record, because I think that is a critical aspect here that we have to address. And Blueprint is revolutionary because one of the things it's doing is fundamentally upend, to some extent, the politics of education funding as it has traditionally been practiced in public education in this country, which is that those who have the ability to be make their presence known, having a parent who can make their presence known and get notice from funding authorities is the greatest asset a child has often had in our system. And this is an attempt to change that, to make sure that every child has that opportunity, regardless of whether or not they have parents in a position to advocate specifically for that school. I hope that's a fair statement, Dr. Bedell.
All I wanted to say was, you said, and you are dead on, the intent is we want our schools to do better because that means the system does better. And I want to just add a third piece to that. When this school system does better because we have done what we need to do to move all of our students, the county wins.
Mm-hmm.
The county wins as a whole.
Yep. And so I just want to, as I said, lay that out there for people to understand. This is a big change, but the goal of it is for our children to do better, all our children. I would also add, early on, Mr. Stansky, you mentioned, and I'm sure those of you and others in the financial world, this is a wearying and daunting process, the 9 different categories and the tracking them down to each school. But it is my understanding, and again, correct me if I'm wrong, that one aspect of Blueprint is implementing lessons learned from the Thornton Commission. Mm-hmm. And it is my understanding that one of the ways the Thornton Commission failed was the money was kind of thrown out there, and there really was not as much follow through in terms of making sure when you create huge, massive legislation like this with so many changes and so many intersecting pieces and agencies and all the rest of it. I mean, that's why the AIB exists with Blueprint. Mm-hmm. That, it is unfortunately the case that the experience has been that this kind of reporting is necessary if we are really going to see demonstrable change along the way. And that's huge. I mean, it's a lot of work. It's a ton of work. And, I appreciate what you're undertaking because I know it's no small feat.
I think you hit it. The Thornton Commission was outcomes-based accountability, and Blueprint is process-based accountability, mm-hmm. right?
Yeah.
And with the working theory of trust the process. If you do these things, your outcomes will increase.
Right.
So yes,
which
you hit it.
Which is in turn based on research, right?
Correct.
All of this was benchmarked against the best internationally performing systems. So none of this is arbitrary. All of it is based on what has been seen and practiced for many, many years. And so I think to that end, and you know, in sort of a bigger sense, what Ms. Schalheim was saying, unfortunately, there's a certain amount of patience that's required here. And as you said, trust of this process, which is very hard and frankly, very easy to criticize because there's going to be discomfort, pressure points all the way through as people kind of adjust to this. I also want to say I appreciated your emphasis, Mr. Stansky, on the fact that the allocations remain targets. I think, and I'm very, as Dr. Bedell knows, I've been hoping we would have a tiered system for a long time, and I'm very, very grateful that we do, because I think another part of this, in addition to ensuring that the distribution of resources isn't based on, I'll say, disproportionate advocacy in certain areas, it's also based on data. We can demonstrate how the need stacks up. And I think that if the process is to be trusted, that data is a critical part of it, and the equity tiering is a sort of crucial foundation for that. The only question I really have, and Dr. Bedell, this is probably a question for you, and more so for the state maybe, and the new state superintendent possibly. I'm always it's just a fact of the way we function in public education in this country that we continue to use the farms metric for something it was never intended for. And I think it's the best proxy we have. It's the best stand-in that we have. But it really is about food insecurity and hunger. It really was never meant to be this sort of full metric of broadly poverty. And so I don't know if there's any talk or any sort of whispers floating in the ether of any continued work to try to develop a more precise battery of metrics for this.
Yeah, so Dr. Tobin, the state has been batting around what they call neighborhood indicators of poverty, using census tract data. So the difficulty is getting to the school level, right?
Yeah.
And that's why the farms metric has always traditionally been the default for poverty indicators for schools. But now with plethora of data out there, there is census tract data that the state could potentially use. There was a report done, I want to say 2.5 to 3 years ago.
Yeah.
I think the issue was the fiscal note once they had tied dollars to, because the farms number undercounts, right?
Undercounts.
It
Yep.
undercounts. And so, I think policymakers felt the census tract data would be a more accurate reflection. And then I think the report came out and they saw the fiscal note and they did what happens a lot, which is
We still love farms.
right. Exactly. But I know those conversations are continuing at the state level. And so I would say more to come on that piece.
Well, thank you for putting that out there, because that's the other thing I will say for the public who's listening. Farms isn't giving us the full picture. And so this structure that blueprint and the equity tiering we've done and all the other things that have been discussed is setting up is, I believe, and I hope, going to get us closer to really serving students in the way that they need. But there's still a lot of wiggle room in there, I think, for a lot of our students and what their need looks like.
And I'll say this, this is, again, our first attempt at trying to put together a tiered model. There are so many other variables that you can take into account that would ensure that more students are included in this. And I think that may be something that we explore at a later time. I think I like what we've started with now, but I will, for the community's consumption, share this. When we did a tiered model in my previous school district, I think we used 13 to 15 different variables.
Yeah.
And when it was all said and done, you know, when people talk about, well, what was the impact? We tiered that whole school district, and I could show you student group by student group against the state, how it benefited students. And in the schools where people thought, oh, I'm losing something, actually the data showed that students prospered even more in those schools under that tiered model. I have the data. I as Monique Jackson will say, I keep receipts.
Yeah.
And I would like to add too, because sometimes I come off as, you know, look at all this work my team has to do to get this right. But what I'm really excited about, besides the grunt work of the accounts, is
Right.
strategic plan, blueprint implementation, and having an opportunity now for fiscal 26 to really build a total resource allocation model that will achieve what we've outlined we wanted to achieve in the strategic plan. And that's what really excites me about this. And as Dr. Bedell alluded to, this is like just step one. But we're going to, you know, we'll have a team this summer already starting to think about 25, 26 school year. What do we want to look like? Here's the strategic plan. Here are the goals. How do we get resources where they need to be to achieve what we've all set out to achieve? And that's, I'm really excited to dig in and do that work. So, while this is hard,
Yep.
it's also exciting.
Well,
This, but it's hard on the front end.
Yep.
Nothing this difficult that we're trying to achieve. If it was easy, everybody would be doing it.
Yep.
If it was easy to create a career ladder, everybody would have one already. And so this is part of what Blueprint is also telling us that we have to do. We have to think differently. We have to be innovative. We have to be fearless. And then we have to work with our community to say, give us some grace to try to figure all of this out. Not everything that we do will be perfect. I've never seen it, and I was a former principal of an engineering program. I don't remember ever getting into something and we got it right on the first time.
Yeah. Well, I think your point is very well taken, Mr. Stansky, and I think we have to recognize, I believe, the incredible possibility here, as you said, of not only the blueprint, but what we are doing in this district, the real alignment. Because at the end of the day, I say often to my very conservative colleagues who are very concerned about the money that's being put into this, you know, if we follow through on all of this, we stand to be so much more efficient with our resources at the end of the day. They will be going where the greatest return on investment lies. And that ultimately is profoundly valuable in my view, because resources are not unlimited. And if we can ensure that between aligning with our 5-year strategic plan, the tiering that we're doing, the blueprint requirements, that we are really honing in rather than a sort of scattershot approach, which we've necessarily in some ways had to take in the past, we really can make sure every dollar is going where we know, based on data, it will be the most effective. The other thing, and I'll finish because I know I've been going on for a while. The last thing I would say for those who are listening in the public, wherever you are in this county, I hope one thing you have taken away from looking at all of this is it's really going to serve you well if your district and your school is diverse. because that is how this funding actually plays out in many ways. And I'm talking about many kinds of diversity. I'm talking about socioeconomic diversity. I'm talking about ethnic diversity. I'm talking about a lot of things, linguistic diversity. That will actually benefit your school and your community. So I hope folks will keep that in mind as we undergo the second half of redistricting, because it will impact how your school does the more diverse your community is. So with that, thank you, Mr. President. That's all for me.
Thank you, Dr. Tobin. So as somebody that taught a long time, I'm looking at tier 4. Most of my teaching time was probably in schools at tier 4. And I will tell you, there were times when I got back to school in August, September, looked at my class sizes and said, oh my goodness, I only have 32 in each of my classes. Because the preceding year I had 38, I had 43. And so as I look at this, I marvel at where we actually are right now. Do we need smaller class sizes? Absolutely. I will tell you, I also did have the opportunity to teach some small classes. And the difference in student outcomes is absolutely off the charts. What do you think the smallest class size I ever had was? Anybody have any idea?
Like,
Dr. Bedell, what do you think?
I'm gonna say probably 20. You're high school, right?
Smallest high school class.
Okay, I'm going to say you probably had one that had a section of about 23.
Dr. Tobin,
I'd say around 20.
Ms. Shahan. She has no idea. I'm going to tell you my third year of teaching, my first year at Brooklyn Park Junior Senior High School, I had a class of 1. I really did. I had a class of 1. I also had the opportunity from time to time to have a class of 12 or 14. That was the exception, not the rule. As I said, I did have a class of 43 quite a few times. I had over 40 quite a few times. So having said that, Mr. Stansky, I just want to thank you so much. The value of this workshop has been off the charts. For so long, in talking with so many of our stakeholders, I've had in the back of my mind, and I've said it to my colleagues, that I just don't think that so many of our stakeholders really understand the impact of the blueprint. And I will continue to say that. I think there are so many of our stakeholders that do not understand the impact of the blueprint. So my recommendation is watch this video. Listen to Mr. Stansky. Listen to his explanations, because it's absolutely been marvelous. We're so blessed, Mr. Stansky, to have you and your staff. And again, I want to thank you so much. Just a couple of things just to kind of clear up. The FTEs that are allocated now are based on projected enrollments.
Correct.
And does that take into account, for instance, legacy students, say at North County or Old Mill, who have decided to remain and not go?
Correct. So one of the reasons our enrollment projections were a bit delayed this year was we were waiting for final decisions on legacy students. And so once we got those decisions, those students were incorporated in the projection.
Thank you. Also, at some schools, such as North County, it has always been a tradition that, let's say, North County would be projected to have an enrollment of 2,200. And along comes September 1 and it's 2,400, or for September 30, it's 2,500. So are there something decided about that?
Yeah. So that's why, one, we keep a small cadre of positions unallocated, and why we ensure we remain disciplined when we issue FTEs, because we have to have FTEs available to deal with spikes that may happen in September. And so to answer your question is yes, we have unallocated FTEs. hopefully we'll get more through the county, and we'll be able to address, as we talked about, the elementary class sizes at 30 or over, plus still have some available for spikes in enrollment in August and September.
Okay. Can we envision a scenario such as this? It's often happened that our administrators are moved from one school to the next every X number of years. But teacher A, teaching in school A, as I taught, I always would get a notice in June, you will be assigned to, and it was always my same school. Is it a possibility that teacher A in school A is told at the end of that school year their assignment, but during the summer, because of some changes or whatever, that a teacher might be moved, as an AP might be moved? Is that something that could potentially happen?
Possible, but not likely. I mean, usually the assignment we give somebody when they leave in June, for the most part, is that assignment they get when they come back in August. There are rare occasions where, that may not be the case, but for the most part, I think that is what will happen.
Okay. I just have a few comments. Dr. Bedell alluded to in an opening statement that there's a notion out there that this board or Dr. Bedell, we don't care about all of our students. That notion, if that exists anywhere out there in the universe, that this board and this superintendent does not care about each and every one of our students, is way off base. And I would like to quote our famous superintendent, Dr. Bedell, who, when he first came to us during one of our meetings on the dais, he just looked at us and he said, folks, tone matters. And so, folks, we want you to be advocates for yourself. If you're a teacher, for your school, for your students, for your communities, but tone matters. Please do so in a respectful manner. And we thank everybody for that. So I see Ms. Shalheim, your light's on again. Ms. Shalheim.
Yeah. So I did have a follow-up or two. The way the seasonality of the allocations of staff. The first crack is in January, February, March, and then through the summer. Is that the way? Is how long have we been utilizing that?
Since at least 10 years since I've been here.
Okay.
And I'm assuming longer.
I'm just
Yeah,
asking
that process has not changed.
Okay, I'm just asking so that folks can hear that at home. So the other teachers that may or may not be involved in that, they've either been, well, those who have been reallocated have already been told
noticed.
that.
Correct.
But the other ones that are sort of waiting and seeing are all well aware of how this works every single year, correct?
Absolutely.
Okay. So so no one at the schoolhouse level in a teaching role or in an administrator role is should be surprised by how this is working this year versus other years.
No, the only thing that changed was the allocation formula. Everything else is status quo as we've done it, at least in the last decade or
Which
longer.
is up on the screen at the moment, and I don't know if the folks at home can see that on YouTube at the moment, but just to reiterate one more time, the ones in green, although were the ideal scenario, that even when this was printed on paper, we couldn't step to because of where we were from a funding perspective. There's a reason why I'm asking all this. Like, it's just like every other meeting I've ever been in. You hear from folks at home whilst
Yes.
you're.
That the The green highlighted, and look, we highlighted that to be transparent, right? I didn't have to highlight it. I could have just said, here it is, figure out what the old formula was. We wanted to say, here's what the old formula was. Here's what the new formula is. However, that old formula, if you are 28 in fifth grade and all of a sudden now you have 29, that never necessarily meant you got another teacher. Sometimes we'd go to 30. Sometimes we'd go to 31 because we didn't have FTEs, right? And so while this was those were the targets, sometimes you're under the target at a school and sometimes, unfortunately, you're over a target at the school.
Right. And just to reiterate one more time, we are not going to see class sizes over 30 as much as we can help it, provided we get the funding for these extra positions based on, I mean, it's unfortunate, right? We all want a new village to open. I would say that this is a great silver lining in lieu of for just this 1 year, because we desperately need these teachers to fill other roles. And so that's the goal, again, is to see those at 30, that people need to exercise some patience regardless of the situation. SPES, I know you're hurting. Okay, I get it. I hear you. But this is not the board's decision. This is the superintendent and his staff's decision based on data, based on enrollment, based on a myriad of other factors, including blueprint. And even if I wanted to, and there aren't 4 other people that would be with me, and I don't want to weave into his lane, it wouldn't matter if I said I moved to XYZ. Because this is how this process works. This is a very thoughtful process that you all employ every single year for at least the last 10. Please watch your tone on emails. And thank you.
Yeah, Ms. Schauheim, thank you for that. Again, to your point around just some of the stuff coming in via email, where it's almost this appearance or this mindset that this guy's come in here and he's destroying everything. He's, turning this district into a non-competitive district. I do take offense to that because I'm a professional. I take my craft seriously. My body of work speaks for itself every stop of my career. And I would never, ever want to be associated with someone who doesn't care about the well-being of every single student. And so, again, Mr. Silkworth made this comment, like, yeah, I get it. People, it's fine to be upset. And if I see 32 kids, I'm probably going to cut a fool too as a parent. I know this. I'm not asking people not to be upset. What I'm asking people to do is trust the process. Let us work this process and give us an opportunity to see whether what we've done, if it's the right process or not. We learn from it, we collect data, and we move forward. But again, this is not an anomaly. It is not an anomaly that you will have some classes in any given school district, in most cases, that are going to have classes of 30, 31, and in some very rare cases, maybe 32 students, right? But it is my intent as superintendent to monitor these numbers. And again, I will say this, just as I would say as a former principal, my job was to back my bosses and the superintendent into a corner. Put me in a situation where I don't have a choice because it's over enrolled and now I don't have a choice. I have to give you this FTE. What I'm encouraging people not to do is withdraw your kids because you're frustrated and you want to move them out because there's a new process. This has never happened to my school before. And rather than, let's keep these students in our schools, get the classes to the levels where this is not even a discussion. I think that will serve all of us better as a county. And the more that we are able to enroll our schools, ultimately that bodes well from a funding standpoint. I think people may not be aware, but our numbers are, I think Mr. Dykstra said nearly 800 students that we've gained over this school year. So, but that funding it lags. It lags, unfortunately. But that's actually a good sign that there's confidence, that people feel like they can enroll their kids into our school district and that they're going to get a strong education, which is the only thing that I'm here to do. Make Anne Arundel County go from what I believe it is a good system to a great system. And being a middle of the road school district, when we look at academic performance, is not a tool that's going to allow us to become great, right? We're going to be great, but we also need people to understand that some of these changes, unfortunately, will create some level of discomfort, but we will emerge a much stronger school district as a result of these things that we're doing now.
Dr. Tobin.
Yeah, thank you. Thank you for those comments, both Ms. Schalheim and Dr. Bedell. And I want to add this. First of all, I want to thank you again, Mr. Stansky, for this presentation, which is not only an excellent presentation, but as you pointed out, for the transparency of it. And Dr. Bedell, that is something you have said from day one, that your goal was to be transparent. And I think that was one of the many reasons that my colleagues and I so happily voted to bring you here as our superintendent. And I do think, with regard to the notion of tone, there are plenty of districts that I'm aware of where there is not this kind of transparency, because the sense is you just get beaten up for it when you share information. Dr. Bedell and his staff have the fortitude and the desire to ensure that the public is aware of everything, can ask questions, can interrogate what we send. But I simply ask for those in the public to think clearly and carefully about whether or not you really want to beat up the people who are trying to give you the information as clearly as they can. Because the normal human response eventually is, why bother? And we're not always going to get the information that we want. But it is important to know it and to understand the reasoning behind it. And so I want to thank you for that. And I know many in the public deeply appreciate that. And I would just urge those, even those who are very frustrated right now, and I do understand that. I've been a parent in this system. I understand what that feels like. But to think through how you address those questions with the people who are here for one reason and one reason alone, which is to ensure each and every student gets the best possible education that they can. So thank you for allowing me that time.
Okay, Dr. Bedell.
Yeah, so as I close out, I want to thank you, Mr. Stansky, for, I think, a job well done, and we will make sure that this is posted and ultimately send out something to let everybody know, please go view the workshop. I think you can gain a lot of insight based on how you presented this today. Also, we would also encourage people to go to the Straight from the Soup recording that just came out, because we are talking about cell phone guidelines. We're going to have conversations about how we're going to continue to focus on discipline in this county and making sure that our students are able to go to school and learn. And then we're going to talk about grading regulations. And we want to tighten up on grading regulations because we don't want to be a school district that has created bad habits, or we're enabling students to graduate with bad habits that transfer to college or that transfers to the workforce. And so we have done some things, we think, to try to offer grace and support our students during the pandemic. But it is time for us to get back to the business of educating students at a high level. And what I know is that wherever you set the bar for students, that's how high some of our students will jump. You set the bar high, we have students who are very capable of jumping that bar at a high level, and that's my expectation. And so we will ask people to review that video, but to also give us the support that we need so that your child can thrive, so that your child will graduate out of this school district globally competitive. And that means we're going to have some support with some of the changes that we're going to put in place come July 1 of this school year, upcoming school year. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Bedell. You're absolutely right. You set that bar high, and our students are going to rise. So, Mr. Stancy, once again, I thank you and your staff so much. I'd like to thank all of this staff that are here with us this evening for being here. Thanks to all of my colleagues during this workshop. Let's all continue to advocate for the great students that we have. So, what's up next? Memorial Day weekend. We hope everybody has a great Memorial Day weekend. And then it's graduation time. So everyone, thanks for being with us. Have a great weekend. Stay safe.